You know, this is the second week in our series called Runaway. Last week we talked about runaway tongue, and this week we're talking about runaway appetites. And we're going to be looking at the book of Judges today, beginning in chapter 13. If you'd like to turn to that, please, you'll be looking at page 394 if you're using one of our Bibles in the chair that's near you. Page 394, Judges 13 through 16. One of my favorite series of books is called The Chronicles of Narnia, written by C.S. Lewis several years ago. I've read them a few different times, and they always give me something to find that I missed the previous time. Really enjoyed them an awful lot, and I just learned recently that Netflix is going to be coming out with a production of that series as well. I hope that they do a great job with it. If you're familiar with that series, you probably know that a movie came out a few years ago called The Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe. It addresses the very first book that Lewis gives us in that series, and in it there are 4 children in England, and through kind of a direction that was given to them by accident, so to speak, in their minds, but it was actually directed. They were supposed to be going through this wardrobe that was found in a bedroom. And as they went through the wardrobe, they discovered that they were moving past the clothes, past the furs that were hanging there, and they entered into this other land called Narnia. And in Narnia, when they first arrive, everything is winter. It's been winter for a long, long time there, because there is a white witch that is in charge of Narnia right now. Several of the inhabitants of Narnia have been turned into statues by her. And she is aware that someday that there are going to be 4 children who will arrive in Narnia. 2 of them will become queens, 2 of them will become kings. And so in this particular story, there's a scene where Edmund, one of the boys, is wandering a bit by himself, and suddenly up on this sled, being pulled by wolves, is this white queen, the witch, and her name is Jadis. Jadis sees Edmund, and she is immediately interested in why he is there, and if he happens to have anybody else with him. And as the story goes, she begins to pump him with questions. But she also sees that he's cold out there in the winter. So she offers him something warm to drink, and then she gives him something special to eat. It's called Turkish Delight. It is his favorite type of candy. And she knows that because she is a white witch. And so she begins to give him this Turkish delight. She lets him sit up in the sleigh with her, and she is asking him lots of questions about who he is, does he have brothers and sisters, and what is he there for? And all along we find that Edmund is just eating this up. In fact, Lewis says at the first bite that he was hooked. Each piece was sweet and light to the very center, and Edmund had never tasted anything more delicious. He continues his insatiable desire for Turkish delight as she continues to ask questions. Lewis goes on to write, at first Edmund tried to remember that it's rude to speak with one's mouth full, but soon he forgot about this and thought only of trying to shovel down as much Turkish delight as he could. And the more he ate, the more he wanted to eat. He never asked himself why the queen should be so inquisitive. Edmund finds himself captive of the wicked queen, and he finds out that his runaway appetite put his life and the lives of his siblings in danger. If you're familiar with that show, you know exactly what I'm talking about, or that series of books. You know, a runaway appetite can be for food. We are inundated with television commercials, especially infomercials late at night, for those who are wanting to go on some sort of a diet to lose weight. They know that in our country that is an issue for a lot of people. They want to trim off some of the pounds and some of the inches that they have, and so they are continually marketing the weight loss. They're continually marketing some type of dietary program for other people because they know that's what it is. Well, this week I happened to notice that there is this contest up in Alaska. It's called the Fat Bear Contest. Maybe you're familiar with that. And you know what they do is at the beginning of it, they get these brackets that are very similar to what it's like in March Madness for college basketball. And you can pick your brackets and you can kind of figure out which bear you think is going to be the ultimate winner of the Fat Bear Contest. Well, I have a couple of pictures today to show you. One of them, this bear on June the 29th of this year, that's Bead Nose the bear, okay? Now, you can see that Bead Nose is out there fishing and trying to get something to eat out there, probably some salmon. And so Bead Nose is out there, but let's go to the next picture. That's Bead Nose of September 30th of this year. Bead Nose was very successful in fishing, okay? And eating everything else he could get his hands on as well, or his paws on. You see, that is an appetite that definitely is runaway, okay? But at the same time, he's supposed to do that. He's going to be hibernating. He's supposed to be looking that way. Most people would not feel good about having their picture in June look like he looked, and now in September looking like he looks right now. Food is not the only appetite that we have, though, that is runaway or can be runaway. It's very easy for things to be out of control for us. Maybe, for example, our runaway appetite is for more stuff. Maybe we just have this insatiable desire to buy more things. We can hardly keep $1 in our pocket because we see something that we want and we purchase it right away. That's just the way that we are. It could very well be that there's maybe for pills or alcohol, or gambling, or sex, or pornography, watching the news several hours a day, playing video games several hours a day. Regardless of what a runaway appetite might be that you can identify with, we're going to see some things in the life of an individual in the scriptures that I think we can relate with a little bit, because the principles of what we see in his life for runaway appetites apply to us no matter what our appetite might be. And so I want to give you a bit of a background on this. In the book of Judges, which I've asked you to turn to, we find the account of how Israel had been given judges by God to lead them in the absence of a king. The last verse of the book of Judges is very telling about what had been going on there for 300 years or so, as they had no king to rule them, only the judges. It says, in those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. In other words, everyone kind of made it up as they went along. Everybody kind of decided what was right for them, and they could do what they wanted to do, and someone else could do what they wanted to do. You can imagine how chaotic that kind of a situation could be. And that's the kind of circumstance that God brought Samson into. Now, Samson had a really neat beginning in his life. He was somebody who was not expected by his parents. He came in and certainly was going to be a very special individual. And his mother had not been able to have children before. This all takes place about 15 miles west of Jerusalem. And as his mother is by herself, an angel approaches her and tells her that because she has never been able to conceive before, that's been a frustration to her. Now she's going to be able to have a baby. She's very excited about this. And this angel gives her some very specific instructions about raising this child as well. Now, as we begin to look at the story of Samson, we were probably, if we were to ask people on the street, what are the most important things that you know about Samson, they would say, well, he had long hair. Secondly, he was really strong. And thirdly, there was a woman in his life named Delilah that brought him down. I mean, most people would probably know that. If we were to look at some of the heroic things that Samson did, we'd say, wow, man, what a really great guy he was. He was able to help Israel in defeating the Philistines in a variety of different ways. But as we begin to kind of peel back that surface level of hero status that people might want to give him, we can discover that there's something there in his life which has been like a thorn in his side for a long, long time. He continues to make mistakes because he is being led by his appetites. His appetites are out of control. He's not able to keep them where they need to be. And so he pursues those appetites in a very unhealthy way. As we begin to look at his life, we will see some things that are important for us to understand about appetites as well, and what they can do to us in a detrimental type of way. One of those things is they can influence us to reject God's boundaries for our life. They can influence us to reject God's boundaries. Samson was said to be a Nazirite. Doesn't mean he was from a place called Nazareth, but a Nazirite was somebody who was set aside to be dedicated, to be consecrated for a purpose. They were to serve the Lord, and they were going to have some special guidelines about how they were to live their life. Now, sometimes a Nazirite took a vow for a while. He did this for a while, and then he was no longer a Nazirite. But Samson, because of the angel's instruction, was going to be a Nazirite all his life. And he was to abstain from drinking wine or beer or other fermented drink, and not even to touch grapes. He was not to touch a dead body. He was never to cut his hair. And if people were to look at Samson, no doubt because of his hair at least, they would probably say, here's a guy that's a Nazirite. Here's a guy that has been dedicated to God. So Samson seemed to lead a dedicated life for the first several years of his life. But the time came when he began to compromise, when he began to play fast and loose with God's boundaries and eventually overstep them. Beginning in chapter 14, we discover that Samson impulsively decides to reject God's boundaries by traveling to a Philistine town. Now, you would think as easily as we travel today, that would be no problem. But for the Israelites, they were not supposed to be going into, visiting, spending time in that particular area. Now, if you're thinking on a map today, if you were looking at Israel, if you go to the west and down a little bit, you'll find the Gaza Strip. That area is called Palestine, and that is where this is taking place. Not where Samson is born, but where he is traveling. He is going into Philistine territory. The most famous Philistine that we learn about sometime after this is Goliath, the giant that David took on. Before this time, we don't know too much about names of Philistines, but we know that they were not good people. And here we find that Samson goes down to this town called Timnah. And while he's there, he sees this young Philistine woman, and he is immediately attracted to her. He may have been the inspiration for the song by the Doors, "Hello, I love you, won't you tell me your name?" Because he has no clue. I appreciate you guys laughing. That first service, man, I had to bring it up to them, saying, I thought that was funnier than you did, I guess. But you guys, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Samson didn't know her name. All he knew was that he was attracted by her looks. He was filled with lust, and that's not a good way to start off a relationship with somebody. And that was his first mistake. If he was looking for a wife, he shouldn't have gone to the Philistines. God had specifically said to the Israelites, do not marry foreign people, whether that's foreign women or foreign men. Do not marry them. And it wasn't because of racism. It was because they would have their own gods, and they would bring their gods with them into the relationship. And we know, for example, from Solomon, who lived many years after this, that Solomon ended up marrying 700 wives. Now, many of them were foreign, and because they brought their gods with them, the comment in the scripture is that he was led astray by his many wives, because they were worshiping foreign gods, and Solomon compromised his faith in the one true God. So Samson, we find, is treading on thin ice right here. He goes back home. He has seen this young Philistine woman. He talks to his parents and he says, I have seen a Philistine woman. Can you imagine immediately his parents are thinking, as soon as they hear Philistine, this doesn't sound good. This is overstepping a boundary. Why were you even there in Timnah is what they're thinking at this point. But he continues on. Now he begins to tell them more about it, and the father objects. But still, he says to them, go get her for me. She's the right one for me. Now that's pretty amazing. He was able to tell she was the right one for him, even though all he had seen was her appearance. Had no clue else who she was other than that she was a Philistine. He says in verse 3, she is right in my eyes. Remember at the last verse of this book where it says everyone did what was right in his own eyes? There he is. She's right in my eyes. For me, she's the right one is what he is saying right here. And what he is doing is he is ready to step outside the boundaries that God has set for the people of Israel. Now, when Samson is telling his parents about the girl, they're trying to change his mind, and he would have nothing of it. He disrespected his parents. He rejected their wise counsel. So common when we are overstepping boundaries that God has put in there for us as believers in Christ, that we can have a tendency to not want to hear what is different than we want to hear. We don't want someone to bring up truth to us. We don't want someone to start talking about responsibility to us, because we want what we want when we want it and how we want it. And so we find here that Samson is rejecting the advice of his parents. I wonder how many parents have tried to talk to a son or a daughter who is dating somebody saying, that is not the right person for you, but that person still rejects that advice. How many people have expressed concern for the choices of a friend that they're starting to make in some other area of their life, only to be shut down and tuned out? Well, that's what's happening in Samson's life. He's rejecting wise counsel, and he's allowing his lust to lead his thinking. God's boundaries are already being crossed in his mind. He hasn't physically crossed them yet, except for going into the Philistine territory, but he in his mind is well past those boundaries. This woman isn't the only way that Samson was rejecting God's boundaries. As he and his parents are going down to meet this woman and her parents, as they go along, apparently there's a separation that occurs between Samson and his parents. Because Samson is near a vineyard, and the scripture tells us that a young lion jumped out of that vineyard and began to attack Samson, and Samson grabbed a hold of it and killed it right there. Now, he eventually catches up with his parents, but he does not tell them about this. What is a Nazarite not supposed to do? They're not supposed to touch a dead body, right? So he has already now touched a dead body by killing this lion. He goes with his parents. They go to Timnah. They begin to meet the other parents who are there. And as they go along, we find that they meet them, they go back home, and then the day for going towards the wedding feast, which will last about a week, comes along, and Samson is going back to Timnah again. His parents are going back for the wedding. But once again, they get separated. Samson takes this little detour. He wants to see what's happened with this lion that he killed. So he sees the lion, and he discovers something interesting. He discovers that inside the lion's rib cage, bees, honeybees have come along, and they have built a nest in there, and they have been producing honey. So instead of steering clear of this dead body, he reaches inside. Wouldn't that be kind of gross? Reaching inside a dead lion, he pulls out this honey. He begins to eat it. Okay, I can imagine how clean his hands were at this point. And then he takes some of that honey and gives it to his parents, still not telling them what he has done or where he has gotten that honey. He is involving innocent people in his stepping over the boundaries. Isn't that what happens sometimes? When we step over the boundaries, we bring other people with us sometimes. It may not be intentional, but it still happens along the way. And Samson is dishonest with the people who love him the most. Isn't that so common when people are allowing their runaway appetites to draw them towards that appetite, towards the fulfillment of that? They will lie to those who love them. They will deceive those who care about them the most. And they will also lie to themselves. And I have a feeling that Samson must surely be lying to himself, telling himself that God's boundaries are too restrictive. They are inconvenient, and it's okay to disregard them because she is right for him. See, isn't it amazing how we can kind of justify and rationalize what we do? We can talk ourselves into things, even though those are wrong things. It's because we have a tendency to overlook our own discrepancies in that regard. Being led by this appetite to go down to Timnah, past the boundaries of Israel, rejecting his parents' advice, was really the beginning of Samson's downfall in life. And that led him further down the path to more problems. That brings us to the second thing. A runaway appetite can cause us to take foolish risks. This week, I happen to have a friend up in the Panhandle preaching at a church up there, and he sent this thing on Facebook, and I was looking to see if I could find anything that had been happening to his church and his property during this time, making sure he was okay. He posted this video from a TV station. It was NBC 15 WPMI from Alabama. There were two guys who were representing the station. They were driving in this black Blazer in this town called Port St. Joe, Florida, in the Panhandle. There's two in this van or in this vehicle are storm chaser Brett Adair and Stephen Johnson. They have a camera with them. They're driving down these roads and they are showing debris flying across the road. There's metal flying. There are trees that are just kind of moving back and forth like this. I mean, it's a pretty serious thing. And they're out there, there's talking and showing people what's going on. People back at the TV station are receiving the feed back there, so they're able to watch what's going on also. They're able to talk with these guys. And sometimes in this 35-minute or so conversation. You hear them talking back and forth with each other on this video. But after about 30 minutes or so, they came to a place where they happened to look up in front and they saw the storm surge that was coming down the road toward them. And they thought to themselves, we can't go any farther. And the guy back at the TV station said, it's going to be pretty small, nothing to worry about. And they said, no, we cannot do that. And so they have to turn around and they find this house that has a concrete wall at the end of kind of like a driveway where a boat is parked and where a car would have been. And they back into that. They put the back bumper basically up against that wall. And the camera is still rolling. And as you're watching, all this water is going down the street and it's rising. It's getting more intense. The winds are really strong. I mean, well over 100 miles an hour. And these guys are in there, they're talking, and you can tell that they are getting concerned. Now, one of them's a storm chaser. He does that for a living, basically. But he is getting concerned, and so they decide they're going to have to try to get into that house if they can. They get out the doors. They get apparently a ladder up against this. They find a door is open, and they go inside this house to ride it out. But all the while, the camera is still filming. And you are able to watch what they have escaped because the water continues to rise. Soon you start seeing it splashing up against the windshield of that vehicle. And then you start watching as the vehicle gets moved around like this because the water is pushing it and moving it along. And these guys were very, very fortunate that house did not come down on them. They honestly were believing that they were about ready to die. They put themselves in a very risky situation. And sometimes when we are chasing runaway appetites, we can also put ourselves in positions that can really backfire on us and hurt us along the way. We may eat foods that trigger diabetes problems. We view pornography thinking there's no harm, but it hurts our marriage. We max out our credit cards because we think we have to have more and more stuff, and we destroy our credit score and put ourselves behind an 8-ball of debt. We continue to bet money that we can't afford to lose because we're driven by our appetite to get rich. And in the meantime, we continue to take foolish risks. What is it that makes us take those risks? One thing is that we convince ourselves that it won't matter if I do this just one more time. Have you ever heard somebody say that? If I just do this one more time, I'll be okay. This will be the last time I ever do it. I'll just do this one more time. It won't hurt anything. And one more time leads to one more time after that. And then one more time after that. And then one more time after that. That's the way that it works. We tell ourselves that we're smart enough to know when to quit. We convince ourselves that we'll know how to get ourselves out of it. Samson is a good picture right here of risky behavior that a runaway appetite produces. When he was at this week-long wedding party, he comes up with a riddle that he's going to tell these 30 guys that are there, supposed to be his attendants. He has probably no clue who they are. They're all Philistines, but they're supposed to be there for him as his wedding partners. So he tells them a riddle. He says this before he gives them the riddle, though. If you can give me the answer to the riddle, then within the 7 days, then I will give you 30 sets of clothing. But if you can't tell me the answer, then you have to give me 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. He ups the ante for himself because he's pretty sure they are not going to be able to come up with the answer to the riddle. And so they say, okay, we're in. Okay, tell us the riddle. And so he tells them this. It's very short. He says, out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. He was talking about the dead lion's carcass and the honey that was inside. They had no clue of this. He told no one else about it. So for 3 days, these guys are racking their brains trying to figure it out. And they are getting to the point of desperation because they don't want to have to buy clothing for Samson. And so they go to his bride-to-be, and they say this. They say, coax your husband into explaining the riddle for us, or we will burn you and your father's household to death. No pressure, of course. Did you invite us here to rob us? That would make me kind of try to be coaxing, I think, if I was having that as a possibility in my life. So Samson, by stepping over boundaries and by taking risks, has put himself in a position of being around some really bad characters. A runaway appetite can put us in proximity of some people that can either be dangerous for us or detrimental to us in another way, and to others associated with us. His bride whines, she cajoles, and finally, because of her constant begging, he tells her the answer to the riddle just before sundown on that seventh day. They come strolling in to Samson and say, hey, we figured it out. We know what it is. And they tell him what the answer is. He says, listen, if you hadn't plowed with my heifer, you wouldn't know the answer, okay? So in other words, you went to my wife, you went to my fiance here, and she gave you the answer. If you hadn't done that, you wouldn't have known. He is so angry. He goes out and he gets 30 pieces of clothing for them, but to do that, he kills 30 Philistines, takes their clothes and brings them back. Once again, touching dead bodies, but this time he has got bloody clothes, he's got muddy clothes, and he presents them to these guys saying, here you go. I didn't promise you I'd stop at the dry cleaners on the way here, okay? Here you go. Here is my end of the bargain right here. And I'll tell you what, they were not happy. He is taking a foolish risk. He handles dead bodies. He's rejecting God's boundaries. And because he is so upset that his bride told them what it was, then he says, okay, I'm out of here. He goes back home. Sometime later, he wants to be with her. And so he goes on back down to Timnah. He's going to go into the house, and his father-in-law says, whoa, wait a minute now. You can't do that. He says, why not? That's my wife. And he says, no, because you left, I said you weren't coming back, so I gave her to your best man, okay? But here's her sister. You can have her, okay? That apparently wasn't a consolation prize to him. He is so upset by this that he decides he's going to do something about it. He's going to get even. He says, this time I have a right to get even. So he catches foxes. He ties their tails together. Can you imagine how much of a Herculean thing that would be? I mean, my dog gets out, or my dogs get out. I got to run forever to catch them, you know? That's just the way it is. I don't like that. Foxes, can you imagine how tough that would be to track down foxes and catch them? But here he is. He's able to do it. He ties their tails together, and as he ties them, he also ties a torch to the tails. And he gets them all out by these fields of the Philistines where the harvest is going to take place. He lights those torches and turns the foxes loose, and they run through those fields, and everywhere they go, they catch them on fire. So not only is their food source destroyed, but also their source of income is destroyed. Samson is really hitting where it hurts. And so these guys are really upset by this, and we find that they go back and they take it out on his wife and her dad. They burn them up, okay? And his negative impact, or his appetite negatively impacted other people. His runaway appetite for revenge caused him to keep on upping the ante. And we're not going to go to everything, but I do want to take you to the story of him 20 years later when he is with Delilah. She is a Philistine operative. I mean, she is a spy. You know? She is one of those ones that she is going to get paid by these Philistines to find out information about him. And the information she wants is, what's the source of your strength? What's the source of your strength? They don't know. They don't have a clue. Because just looking at him, he probably looks like me, you know, but he doesn't look like he's a massive bodybuilder or something like that. He's a guy that's kind of runny looking, you know, kind of skinny looking. And so that's what they're looking at him, and they're thinking, what's the secret right here? How could you be doing that? It just doesn't make sense. And so Delilah and Samson kind of start this relationship. Now you can imagine what it was like. Maybe he goes to her house and she just kind of engages him in conversation. Maybe they sit there and talk for a while, and she's kind of flirty a little bit, and he kind of is playing along, and they're asking each other questions and talking about their lives. And somewhere in the conversation she says, well, hey, you know, you're such a strong guy. How could you be so strong? What's the secret of your strength? I mean, what would it take to make you so you weren't so strong? And so he plays along with that, and he tells her some things. And so the first thing he says, listen, if you were to take 7 fresh bowstrings and tie me up with those, you know, I would be just like everybody else. You know, I'd just be an ordinary person. You know? And so we find that she ties him up. He's probably just playing along, thinking this is fun. And then she yells at him, hey, the Philistines are here. And he goes, shh, just like that. And those bowstrings all break away. Well, there were Philistines in there, but they were hiding in the house. I don't know where they were. You know, it must have been kind of dark where they were, hiding underneath blankets or behind a overstuffed couch. I don't know where they were, but they were there to take him on once he proved that he was weak. Well, that didn't work so well. So the next thing she says, okay, you're messing with me now, I can tell. Okay, this time, tell me the answer. So once again, he's playing. And he says, well, if I'm bound with a new rope, then I'm just like everybody else. And so she gets this rope and she ties him up, and he's probably playing along. Oh, this is fun, ha ha. We're having a good time in here, flirting around. You're tying me up. That's kind of fun. And then she says, hey, Samson, the Philistines are here. And it's a sign to them, of course, to be ready. And then he just goes, just like this again, and the ropes all break again, okay? And I'll tell you what, next time, she is getting a little bit more desperate right here because they owe her a lot of money, and she really wants to be able to get this. And so this time he says, if you weave my 7 locks of hair together in a loom with some fabric, then I'll be just like everybody else. So if you put a little pin in it right there, give me kind of a man bun, then I'll be just like everybody else, okay? And so here he is. He's kind of flirting with disaster. He's getting closer to the answer, isn't he? He is skirting close to the edge. He is just about ready to skate off the edge right here. So she weaves his hair. He falls asleep, and she's massaging his head. And he probably feels, oh, this feels so good. And, she's weaving his hair, putting it in the loom, putting the pin in there. She says, Samson, hey, the Philistines are here. And he's thinking, this is a fun game, So he gets up and pulls the bun out, and sure enough, boom, he's strong again. So this time, she pulls out the waterworks. She starts crying. And she says, you don't love me. Women do that, guys, don't they? If you really love me, you do the dishes. If you really love me, you'd sweep the floor. If you really love me, you'd buy me. I'm just teasing on that. Okay. You women know how you are now, okay? All right. So here we find that she is really coming on strong to him, and he says, okay. All right, and this time, because she keeps after him about it, the game is kind of over. But he's tired of the questioning. And so this time, in a weak moment, he tells her the real secret. He says, a razor has never touched my hair, for I'm a Nazirite to God. His appetite for her made him risk telling the truth. He was hoping that would never go anywhere else. But you know how it is? Last week we talked about the runaway tongue, didn't we? She was ready to tell those other guys what was going to happen right here. She was ready to tell them he is now ready to be taken. Because Samson lays down, he falls asleep, and she cuts his hair. And then when he is about ready to wake up, she says, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He gets up, has no clue his hair has been cut. And these guys really do come out of hiding at that point. And they take him on, and they shackle him. They gouge out his eyes. They take him back to their town, and then they put him where they would normally put like a donkey grinding grain. They attach like a harness to them and a big pole that goes out, and he's pushing around this big stone that kind of grinds the grain. So he's pushing this stone around, and there they are, they're mocking him, making fun of him, and talking about how he had destroyed the grain all those years ago, and now he's having to pay for it by doing this. I mean, they're really putting him down, and they're really putting God down too in the process, because they're thinking their gods are more powerful than the one true God. And there's something else that happens right here. Samson's dream has turned into a nightmare. He told the truth. He took the ultimate risk. It backfired on him, and something else has happened. It says the Lord left him. He didn't know it. The Lord left him. We find another situation later on when they get a king named Saul. Saul has a thing where he disobeys God, and the Lord left him also. Samson had begun to push himself away from God so much, to compromise himself so much, and the people of God so much, that God said, okay, I'm getting out of here. I'm leaving you to yourself right now and to them. And a runaway appetite can make us make excuses also. Samson, earlier in talking to his own people in chapter 15, verse 11 says, as they did to me, so I have done to them. In other words, I'm just paying them back for what they've done to me. I wouldn't be doing this if they hadn't done it to me first. It's all their fault, just like two kids arguing, right? You hear that in the house sometimes when parents come home and kids are arguing. They did it to me. No, they did it to me first. That's what Samson is doing right here. They did it to me, so I'm doing it to them. But sometimes we blame God and say, I wouldn't be doing this if he hadn't made me this way. Other times we tell ourselves, I'll just do this one more time. I can quit anytime I want to. But deep down, we know inside that's a flimsy statement. Sometimes we excuse giving in to our appetites by saying, I've been working hard lately. I deserve this drink, or I deserve this food, or I deserve to spend this money that I don't really have. You know, Jesus said the truth will make you free. Someone else came along and added to that and said, but it will hurt you first. The truth sometimes hurts, doesn't it? The truth needs to get our attention. And here, what we find is we have to be honest to stop making excuses. The hardest thing a person can ever say to themselves is, I need help. I've got a problem I can't handle. Isn't the first step of any recovery program, step number 1, admit you have a problem? So we find that Samson is having to do right here. You'll never get better until you're willing to say, I really need help in this area of my life. And Samson is exhibit A of that principle. Runaway appetites can also lead us to hurt others. When we abuse our appetite, we hurt other people who love us. We hurt society when we can't take care of ourselves and we lie and we steal and we do things that are feeding an appetite. And we hurt ourselves, making ourselves slaves to an insatiable desire. Here's the truth. The truth is, if we don't control our appetites will control us. If we don't control our appetites will control us. Thomas Costain had a book called The Three Edwards and described the life of a guy named Reynold III, a 14th century duke in what is now Belgium. He was grossly overweight, and Reynold was commonly called by his Latin nickname Crassus, which meant fat. After a violent quarrel, Reynold's younger brother Edward led a successful revolt against him. Edward captured Reynold but did not kill him. Instead, what he did was he placed him inside a room. He built the room around him. He just kind of put him there and just kind of built this room around him and told him he was free to leave anytime. Now, you would think that would be a very easy thing. Doors were unlocked, windows were open and able to be gotten out of. But because of his size, he was unable to leave the room. And so he was stuck there. And that wouldn't have been difficult for most people, but here he is really needing to lose weight. And Edward knows his older brother. Each day, he sends him a variety of delicious foods into the room. So instead of dieting his way out of prison, which would have gotten him out, Reynold grew fatter. And when Duke Edward was accused of cruelty, his answer was, my brother is not a prisoner. He may leave whenever he so wills. Reynold stayed in that room for 10 years and wasn't released until Edward died in a battle. By that time, his health had gotten so bad that he died within a year, a prisoner of his own appetite. If we don't control our appetites will control us, won't they? Listen, to control our appetites, it's going to take some things. Let me just give these to you real quickly, okay? First of all, it's going to take strong determination. Strong determination. We got to have the want to be able to do that. Samson didn't even try, and no wonder things backfired on him so badly. Secondly, we need to have the right advice. We need to heed the right advice. If Samson would have listened to his parents right off the bat, he could have saved himself all kinds of problems right here. He could have avoided a lot of heartache that controlled a runaway appetite. My friend Mark Atterbury, who preaches over in Poinciana, wrote about Samson one time in a book called The Samson Syndrome. And in that book, he talks about who to listen to. Let me give those to you real quickly. Listen to people who disagree with you. He says, if the only people you listen to are those who agree with you, you'll never have your actions challenged and your course altered if it needs to be. He also said, listen to people who love you. Chances are good that they'll have your best interests in mind. Thirdly, listen to people who have achieved the success that you are longing for. Talk to people who have made it up the hill. Talk to people who have been successful in overcoming that appetite. And listen to their story and begin to emulate them. Also, listen to those who demonstrate wisdom. Listen to people who know and love God's word. Proverbs 2:6 says, the Lord grants wisdom from his mouth. From his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. Another thing that we need to have is regular accountability. You know, if we look at the life of Samson, one thing we never see in his life is we never hear about a friend of Samson. We hear about those 30 guys at the wedding. We hear about the one guy that's supposed to be his best man, who he probably had no idea who he was. We don't hear anything about him having a friend throughout that time. We never hear of anybody coming alongside Samson and talking with him about his life situation. He was alone. And sometimes when we try to do things alone, we do not get very much success rate out of that. We need other people around us. We need to be accountable to somebody who will ask us questions, sometimes tough questions, to help us to be able to be honest and to be free from those runaway appetites. And then smart reward. We need to make sure that we reward ourselves smartly, not with something you're trying to overcome. For example, if you've been trying to say no to alcohol, don't celebrate your progress by going out to the bar, okay? That would not be a good thing, okay? If you've been staying away from unnecessary calories, don't celebrate your progress by eating a gallon of ice cream to celebrate. Reward yourself with something that you've wanted for a long time. Maybe when I get to a certain size, I'm going to buy a new set of clothes. Do not celebrate by going to Golden Corral, okay? That will probably set you back quite a ways in that regard. And then next, trust in God's ways. Trust in God's ways. God gives us his word not to suppress us or to hold us back or steal our fun. Instead, he knows what works and what doesn't. He wants us to be spiritually, physically, and emotionally healthy. You know, one of the things that I love about the scriptures is that they give us the picture of a lot of people who messed up but still had another opportunity. You know, it says that God left Samson. We find from the end that God actually answered a prayer for Samson and enabled him to cause a building to fall down and to kill a lot of Philistines in the process of that. Sounds gross, sounds kind of ugly in a way, but God was giving Samson another victory. And if you were to turn to the New Testament, you would find in the book of Hebrews, there's a whole list of people in Hebrews chapter 11 who are kind of called heroes of the faith. You'll find Samson's name in there. Isn't that interesting? Somebody who could not control his appetites, they were run away with him, but still God saw something redeeming in Samson and used him and put him in that part of the Bible in the Faith Hall of Fame. You know, you may be here today saying, I've messed up so much, I just don't think I could ever accomplish what God wants me to do. I don't think I could ever be victorious over a runaway appetite or to be successful in my life in the way that would be pleasing to God. But I want you to know that you know, you don't have to listen to the voice that tells you can't do it, okay? You can listen to the voice of God, and God will tell you, I'll be with you, and together we can do that. Together we can be strong. Together I will give you victory over whatever that is in your life. Now, many of us today here are already Christians. We already have accepted Christ. We've been baptized into him. We belong to him. But maybe there's somebody here today who has never taken that step of faith, never surrendered your life over to Jesus Christ to allow him to become your Lord and your Savior. Well, this time we're getting ready to lead into is an invitation time for you to make that decision, which I believe is the most important decision anybody could ever make in their whole life. And if you've been thinking about this, maybe God's Spirit has been prompting you about this for a while, or even maybe just today, and you say, you know what? I know I need to respond. If God's Spirit's been talking to you, if the truth of the Word has been talking to you, and you know this is what you need to do, why don't you come up? I'll be right down here in front. I would love to talk with you during this song, and I pray that maybe the words of this song about being hungry for God might encourage you to come up and really give yourself to him. Let's stand together and let's sing.